Hey, hello, Computer Studies 10. We're going to be taking a look at using CSS and HTML to create a grid layout for your website. The grid technique in CSS basically allows you to divide a container, such as a div, into a grid with columns and rows so that you can sort of lay things out across this grid. I think, once you get some of the basics down, it'll be pretty straightforward to change these things yourself. You have to know about like 5 or 6 new properties. And once you got those going on, I think you're going to have a good time with it. It will take a bit of time just to try things out and experiment and see how it works. So, put in that time and ask lots of questions in class. Okay, so let's get started. So here's what we got so far. We got this, not a grid. It's a purple. This purple div here is basically a container, and then it has 6 sub divs inside. And eventually we're going to lay this out into some kind of a grid structure. So I'll show you what it looks like in terms of the HTML. So you can see we have a container div that surrounds 6 smaller divs. So total there's seven divs. And these are going to be the things that become sort of our sections of our web page. So we can see the container div, and then I have a header, and then content, I guess 4 content divs, and a footer. Is this required to have 6 divs in a container? No, you need to put in the amount that you need to make your design come true, but this is just to demonstrate so you can see what's going on. So as you can see right now, they all just kind of lie on top of each other, because right now they're a block, and they take up all their horizontal space beside them. So we would like to arrange them instead into a grid. So let's take a look at the CSS. Right now, all this CSS here is just to make them look pretty. So there's nothing new here or interesting. I'll note that the div container is centered, and it has a specific width. So the grid is going to be inside of that structure. So let's turn on the grid. So the first thing I recommend doing is doing this, display grid. So if you put in this property and with this value, basically what you're going to have is this container, which again, the container is the dark purple box that surrounds everything. That's not going to be subdivided into a grid structure. Now by itself, it doesn't do much. If I refresh, nothing really changes, but it's there now. It's ready to be sliced into different parts. So now I can start putting in rows and columns. So the way you define the rows and columns are with grid template rows. And I'll just type in a couple numbers here and I'll come back to explain it. Let's just do, 100 px, 200 px, 300 px. And I'll put in grid template columns, and that's going to be for specifying how many columns your grid is divided into. So it's going to be, I'm going to use these units, 1fr, 2fr, 3fr, just to demonstrate. Okay, so that is the structure I've chosen. What does this mean? So effectively what's going to happen is I'm going to get 3 rows and 3 columns. Why is it 3? Well, I put 3 numbers here, so that means I get 3 rows. And I put in 3 numbers here, so I get 3 columns. So that's how you decide how many rows and columns you are. If you want more columns, I can put in more. I could put in 1fr. So now I have 4 numbers here. So that means I will have 4 columns. Now I don't have enough divs that will fit into this space. I only have 6. So I'm just going to back it off a bit. I'm going to make it 2 columns. 2 rows and 3 columns. Okay, so let's take a look, and now that we see that with these, the number of numbers matters. We have 2 rows, 3 columns. Let's see what the effect of that is. I'll save it and refresh it. And yeah, well, it's kind of hard to see what happened here. It almost looks like I have diamonds just because I have border radius on things. Let me, so I guess I'll just mention that I do have 2 rows here and 3 columns. And I'll just put in some spacing between them so you can see the individual divs. So I'm going to put in what's called grid row gap, and I'll just make it some number, grid column gap. That's going to be the spacing between, and you don't have to put this in. Absolutely, designs don't have to have gaps in them, but just so you can see what's happening, I'm going to put those in. There you go. So now you can see those divs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see I have 2 rows, 3 columns. Now, what is controlling the size of these rows and columns? So you can see that this column is skinnier than the last column. the top row is, not as tall as the bottom one. So let's take a look and see what's going on there. So the reason why the heights and widths are the way they are is because of these numbers here. Now, how many numbers you put here controls the number of rows, and here the number of columns, but the individual values are the height of each row for the rows, and for columns, this is the width of each row. Now, I'm using two different units here. I'm using pixels here and fractions here. You can use pixels for both. You can use fractions for both. You can, mix and match. You can use fractions for rows and pixels for columns. I just wanted to show you the two different kinds so you can sort of see. So again, these are going to be the heights. So if I change this number to 300, that's the height of the first row, and this is the height of the second row. So maybe I'll make this one 600, and you'll see that the heights of the rows change. My first row will be 300, and my second row will be 600. That's how you control the height. Now, to go back, if you're looking at the fractional units, they represent how many fractions of the whole do you have. So to get the whole, you add up all your fractions. So you have 1, 2, 3, so that's 6 altogether. So that means this 1 FR is 1/6. This is 2/6, and this is 3/6. So that's how it's calculating their widths. And then it's like 1/6 of what? Well, 1/6 of the available space in your container. And that's what creates the widths of the rows. So for example, if I put in 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, that means each one will be a third of the size. The total FR is 3. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. And this is 1/3, 1/3, and then 1/3. So they'll basically be equal. If we refresh, we'll see that they equal out. All right. So things are going okay. Now, in terms of like laying this out, it's not really what I had in mind, actually. I was imagining more of maybe this is like going to be, 200 at the end. I wanted maybe 3 rows, 2 columns, and I'd like to have one of my divs stretch across the whole space. So I'm going to make it look like, maybe like this. So now I'm going to have 3 rows with these specific heights. Oh, I forgot my PX. And then I'm going to have 2 columns. One's going to be 1/3, and the other's going to be 2/3 of the width. Now, if I refresh, you'll see I get sort of 3 rows now, 2 columns, and I think that's good. I'd like this one to like stretch across the whole. I'd like this one to stretch across the whole. That means I'm actually going to need 4 rows, but we'll get there. So how do I get, say, for example, the first one to stretch across the whole row across multiple columns? I guess I have it set up for styling both the header and the footer, so that's the first and the last. So I'll go type in this one. So this is how you get it to span multiple rows. Multiple columns, I guess I should say. You can also do rows. That would make it stretch vertically down, but I'm going to stretch it across. So that would be grid column start span 2, and that means these divs, the header and the footer, will span across 2 columns. So if I refresh, you'll see. Oh, let me try again. Did I not save? Grid column start span 2. Oh, I spelled grid wrong. Gird. There we go. So now you can see nothing. Nothing happened. What did I do wrong? I still spelled it gird. I didn't drink my coffee yet today. There we go. See, now that div takes up the whole top, and then this one takes up the whole bottom, but it looks so skinny. What happened? Well, because this one took up the whole top, it pushed the next div down here, and so they all kind of got pushed down, and I ran out of rows. I literally only have 3 rows defined here, so I should probably define another row. So let's put in, maybe make this one another 200. So now I have 4 rows, and that makes sense because 2 of my divs are taking up entire rows all on themselves. So if I refresh, that one gets its whole thing. Yeah, and if you want, you could like stretch them out as well. You could make them span, multiple columns. So maybe we could give this one, we could call this one sidebar. And then if I said div.sidebar, I could make it grid row start span 2. So then a sidebar will span across multiple rows. That's going to mess up. We're going to have an extra div now because we're using up more of that space. But if I refresh, Oh, I broke it. Well, I'll have to double check what happened there. Pretty sure it's grid row start and span 2. Mm, we'll figure what happened there. So we'll leave it at that. And I'll go check. Maybe I made a mistake on this one. But everything else should get you going in the right direction. And I hope you have a good luck with that. And you can see it's pretty tricky. So call me over and I'll see what might have gone wrong there. Okay. Thanks, everybody.